Just like being thankful for my life does not make me pro-rape. But people actually say that to me. A lot of people, especially on university campuses during Q&A, they'll say, oh, so what you're saying is that if abortion had been legal, you wouldn't be here today. Well, you know, if your birth mother hadn't been raped, you wouldn't be here today either. So does that mean that you're pro-rape? People actually say that to me. And I explained to them that there is a huge moral difference because I did exist. And my life would have been ended because I would have been killed through a brutal abortion. I may not look the same as I did when I was 4 years old or 4 days old, yet unborn in my mother's womb, but that was still undeniably me, and I would have been killed, and that is a huge moral difference. Well, at the time I'd been beat up, I had really hit rock bottom. From all outward appearances, I had so much going for me. I excelled in academics and athletics. I was attending a great law school, but I was totally deteriorating on the inside over this whole issue of value. And that is when God called me back to him. Now, I was adopted and raised in a Jewish family. I went to 5 years of Hebrew school 3 days a week. I was bat mitzvahed and everything, but I never saw my parents pray. And in high school, I had a friend who invited me to hear a special youth speaker who went through Old Testament prophecy, and he laid out the message of the gospel. Now, I had never heard this before. Trust me, Jesus is not a popular subject in a Jewish household. And I was amazed, and I knew that that was truth, and I believed that night. But then after 9 months, I felt forsaken by my church friends. I no longer had a ride, and my Jewish parents were not about to drive me. So I ended up spending some of those toughest years of my life away from God, away from church, on my own, doing things my way and the world's way until he called me back. It's like he said, are you done? Are you going to let me take over now? And it's been amazing since. But let me take you back to when I was 18, and I first learned how I was conceived. Of course, at that point, I thought about my birth mother. And I thought, she must hate me. This has absolutely got to be the worst thing that's ever happened to her in her life. She's never going to want to meet me. She probably wanted to abort me. And then after a while, I had it all figured out that if somehow I could just meet her, and if I could hear that maybe there was some mistake, that this was not how I was conceived, then again, I could feel good about myself and I could feel safe. Like I wouldn't have to still feel like I was a target. I didn't want to be part of that classification, conceived in rape. You know, who would? So I ended up being one of the first people in Michigan to have a judge allow my caseworker to try to contact my birth mother and see if she wanted to meet me. And it worked. I was attending college out of state at the time. I finally received a letter with my birth name, which was Judy Ann Miracle. So I was a miracle baby. I thought that was kind of cool. And I had her name, Joanne, with her phone number. Trembling, I called her up. She said that she was sorry to hear that I already knew. But then she proceeded to fill me in on some horrific details that I was totally unequipped to hear. She's 4'10". She weighed 90 pounds, really petite. A single mom heading to the grocery store at night, right down the street from her home. The guy jumped out of the bushes with a knife, abducted her, and basically she went on to describe for me in graphic detail how he brutally raped her. And that's how I was conceived. That was so hard to hear for several reasons. First of all, to think that I was conceived out of a truly worst case scenario, I just felt totally worthless. Like garbage. because of people who would say that my life was like garbage, that I was disposable. And then I had to realize that my biological father was a really bad man. She said she had gone to several police lineups and stopped going because she wouldn't recognize his face, but that they knew that this was a serial rapist. And all these years, I had really dreamed so much of meeting her. I had written poetry about meeting her. And so to hear that she had been violated like this really pained me. We arranged for me to fly home and meet her on her 51st birth date. And in the meantime, she sent me photos and a letter. And she wrote, "My dearest Rebecca, hoping by now that the shock of finding out all the details of your birth are forgotten. For that was not reason enough of having to give up something as beautiful as you were. Nothing as precious as a baby. Mostly when you go through the 9 months and the birth, all alone, feeling like no one loves you. But you were so perfect and pretty. All these years, I had nothing of you, nothing saying you were part of me. Just the memory of carrying a baby that I hoped one day would try to find her real mother, as I always wanted to know my baby. You were always with me in my thoughts. You were always with me in my heart, mostly in July. It seems like a lifetime, I know. When I was sick 2 years ago, I thought I would never get to know my little girl. Would you please even get me a copy of the letter you sent to the Oakland County judge? It made me cry. Also, I would like copies of your poems. These are things I would like to read. It's been a long 3 weeks, looking forward to our meeting. I didn't know how to express my inner feelings. And then she put in caps, "It's so great, big, beautiful. It's always been my dream. I am so happy I am crying." She wrote in closing, "A love that ate at me for 19 years. My daughter at last. With love, your mom, Joanne." Wow, that was just all my dreams come true. I felt so affirmed, and I felt like, yes, I was wanted. I flew home, had a wonderful reunion weekend with her. The next day, she had a huge family reunion for me. I got to meet my half-brother, which was really weird to think we could have grown up together. 6 years later, I met my half-sister when I flew down to Florida for a 5-generation photo. It was the 4th time in a row that they had 5 generations of women alive. I got to room with my grandmother at the time, which was so cool. But after this initial reunion weekend, I flew back to college, went to a few meetings of Students for Life. I didn't get involved at that point because I didn't feel like I fit in anywhere. I was making horrible choices in my life. But it gave me the courage and support I felt I needed to finally call her and ask her about abortion. Because I still needed to know. And she told me that if abortion had been legal in Michigan at the time, that she would have aborted me. I said to her, "Well, you don't mean if you had to do it all over again, right?" She said, "No." So what about everything you said in that letter? She said to me, "You don't know what it was like. And I know that that's true. But I also know that today, she's okay. In fact, she's doing great. She has a wonderful husband, a beautiful home, and despite the utter horror of her saying that to me, that the totality of my entire existence was worth nothing, that her 8 months from the time she found out she was pregnant, her 8 months of choice outweighed my entire life. I still chose to nurture a relationship with her, to honor her for the role that she did play in my life. And frankly, I just thought that if I was good enough she'd change her mind. Well, by the time she did change her mind about abortion, 6 years later, I was at a really good place in my life where I no longer needed to hear that for my own well-being. But it was still great to hear. I was with her when she was making baby clothes for my niece in Florida, who was in an unplanned pregnancy with her first great-grandchild. She said to me, I'm really glad that she decided to have this baby. And by the way, I've changed my mind about all that. 2 days later, Norma McCorvey, who's Jane Roe from Roe versus Wade, announced the very same thing to the nation, that she had changed her mind about abortion after years of having worked in an abortion clinic, yet never actually having had one herself. And how nice that she can do that. Change her mind about abortion and still have the opportunity to enjoy a relationship with her daughter from that case. What about the millions of women since, for whom changing their mind is the very painful realization that they will never have that opportunity here on earth? Now, her daughter is around my age. People forget that she had a daughter, not some fictitious, theoretical, philosophical, legal entity called a fetus, but a real person, and a woman no less. Don't ever let people forget that we are talking about real people, especially in the case of Roe versus Wade. The trial date is in a footnote of the court's opinion. It was exactly 10 months from my birth date. The U.S. Supreme Court decision was exactly 3.5 years to my birth date. So I just barely made it, and so did her daughter. Well, as you can imagine, this issue would come up quite a bit in law school. I'd raise my hand in a room of a couple hundred students, share how I was conceived, and explain the truth that whenever you identify yourself as being pro-choice, or when you make that exception for rape, that what that really translates into is you being able to stand before me, look me in the eyes, and say to me, I think that your mother should have been able to abort you. That's a pretty powerful statement. And I would never say anything like that to someone. I would never say to someone, if I had my way, you'd be dead right now. But that is the reality with which I live. It's like, describe for me how it's not. And I can tell you that it hurts, but I know that people don't put a face to this issue. For most, it's just a concept, a quick cliche, sweep under the rug and forget about it. And I do hope that my story and the dozens of other life-affirming stories on my website of others conceived in rape and incest, a page dedicated to women who became pregnant by rape, can all help to put faces, voices, stories to this issue. Well, in response, I'd have people say to me, well, I'm not saying that I think that your mother should have aborted you. I'm just saying I think it should have been her choice. Yeah, but her choice was to abort me. You don't really know that. No, I do know that. How can you really know something like that? Because she told me. Well, maybe she might not have, but she said she would have. And it's like, wait a second, this thing you say you believe in, why all of a sudden now standing here are you so uncomfortable that you have to create this fiction in your mind that maybe she might not have in order to try to absolve yourself of any sense of responsibility? The fact is that I am alive today because of pro-life advocates who, without even knowing my exact existence, yet recognized that mine was a life worth saving. And they made sure that abortion was illegal in Michigan, even in cases of rape. 100% pro-life, no exceptions, no compromise. They are my heroes, and I owe my life to them. And that is why I, in turn, do the same for others. If your mother chose life for you, how nice for you. But mine did not. She chose abortion for me. And pro-life advocates chose life for me.